Imagine if scientists reconstructed Earth's history from rock layers and isotopic signatures spanning 4.6 billion years. Every page tells a story more insane than the last, from the time our planet was basically a lava lamp the size of a world, to when oxygen was literally poison to most life forms. Scientists in 2025 have been rewriting this story with groundbreaking discoveries that reveal how close we came to never existing at all. There were 5 major mass extinction events when life almost got completely erased from the rock record, and somehow we're still here to tell the tale. But this story starts in a place you wouldn't even recognize as Earth. When Earth was a literal hell planet. 4.5 billion years ago, our planet looked nothing like the blue marble we see in space photos today. Earth was basically Venus with commitment issues, a molten hellscape where surface temperatures hit 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit on a cool day. The entire planet was covered in an ocean of liquid rock that stretched from what would eventually become continents to the deepest ocean basins. This wasn't just hot, this was metal melting, atmosphere boiling, everything is on fire hot. Advanced computer modeling from 2025 research teams has shown us exactly what this nightmare looked like. For the first half-billion years of Earth's existence, the surface never cooled enough to form solid rock consistently, with limited rock preservation and intense heat dominating the early Hadean period. Continental crust began solidifying during the Archean Eon as conditions gradually stabilized. The whole planet was essentially a giant lava lamp, with currents of molten material flowing in slow-motion rivers of fire. Massive impacts from asteroids and comets kept heating things up, adding more energy to a system that was already running at maximum temperature. Each collision sent shockwaves through the molten surface, creating temporary craters that filled back in with liquid rock within hours. If you somehow managed to time travel to this period, you wouldn't just die from the heat. The atmosphere was a toxic soup of methane, ammonia, hydrogen sulfide, and carbon dioxide that would be toxic to most life forms we know today. There was no oxygen anywhere on the planet. The atmospheric pressure was probably dozens of times higher than what we experience today, creating a crushing environment that makes Venus look hospitable. Water vapor existed in the atmosphere, but it couldn't condense into liquid because the surface temperature was too high. Any droplet that tried to form would instantly turn back into steam. This chemical cocktail wasn't just dangerous, it was completely alien. The methane and ammonia created a reducing atmosphere that worked like a massive chemistry set running wild experiments. Ultraviolet radiation from the young sun, which was about 30% dimmer than today but still intense enough to drive chemical reactions, bombarded the surface during the early Archean period when no ozone layer existed to filter it out. Lightning storms probably raged constantly through the thick atmosphere, providing energy for molecular interactions that wouldn't be possible under normal conditions. The strangest part is how impossible it seems that anything could emerge from this chaos. Early Earth was basically a planetary-scale furnace with a toxic atmosphere and no solid ground anywhere. Every condition that we associate with life was completely absent. There were no stable surfaces for complex molecules to organize themselves, no liquid water for chemical reactions to take place in controlled environments, and no protection from radiation or impacts. The planet was essentially sterilizing itself continuously. But recent discoveries have revealed something remarkable hiding in this hellscape. Zircon crystals found in Australia and dated to this early period contain chemical signatures that suggest liquid water existed somewhere on Earth even during the molten phase. These crystals are virtually indestructible, and they preserve chemical information about the conditions when they formed. The isotope ratios in these ancient zircons indicate that water was interacting with rock at temperatures low enough for the water to remain liquid, at least in some locations. This discovery has changed how scientists think about early Earth conditions. The planet wasn't uniformly molten everywhere at all times. There were probably areas where the surface had cooled enough for water to exist, maybe in shadowed regions or at higher altitudes where atmospheric pressure was lower. These would have been tiny islands of relatively stable conditions in a world dominated by chaos. The water would have been incredibly hot by our standards, probably close to boiling, but it was liquid water nonetheless. The atmosphere during this period was like a chemistry experiment designed by someone who wanted to see what would happen if you mixed every reactive gas together and then added heat and electricity. Methane and ammonia don't just sit quietly in the atmosphere, they react with each other and with other compounds to create more complex molecules. The constant lightning and ultraviolet radiation provided energy for these reactions, while the high pressure kept everything compressed together. This wasn't a stable, peaceful environment, but it was incredibly active chemically. New research from 2025 has revealed that asteroid bombardment during this period wasn't just destructive, it was also creative. Each impact brought new chemical compounds to Earth's surface and atmosphere. Some asteroids contained organic compounds that had formed in the cold depths of space, while others carried metals and minerals that became part of Earth's chemical inventory. The impacts also created temporary high-energy environments where complex chemical reactions could take place. Instead of just destroying everything, the bombardment was actually delivering raw materials and energy for building more complex molecules. The heat and pressure from impacts created conditions similar to what chemists use in laboratories to synthesize organic compounds. High temperature and pressure can force simple molecules like methane and ammonia to combine into more complex structures. The shock waves from impacts created areas of extreme conditions that lasted for seconds or minutes, just long enough for chemical reactions to create new compounds that wouldn't form under normal conditions. These reactions were probably happening millions of times across the planet's surface, as impacts continued to reshape the landscape. What makes this period even more fascinating is how the constant destruction and recreation actually helped complex chemistry develop. Every time an impact melted and reformed part of the surface, it mixed different chemical compounds together in new combinations. The planet was essentially running countless chemical experiments simultaneously, trying out different molecular combinations to see what would stick around long enough to become more complex. Most of these experiments failed, but the few that succeeded began the long process of building the molecular machinery that would eventually become life. This hellish environment that should have prevented any complex chemistry from developing somehow became the perfect laboratory for creating the first organic molecules. The combination of high energy from impacts and volcanic activity, a chemically rich atmosphere, and the presence of liquid water in protected areas created conditions where simple molecules could combine into more complex structures. The constant mixing and heating ensured that different compounds would encounter each other and have enough energy to react. What looked like a recipe for sterility turned out to be exactly what was needed to jumpstart the chemistry of life. But the real surprises were still coming, and they would involve something that seems completely harmless to us today. The Great Oxygen Poisoning. Here's the thing nobody tells you about oxygen. It was Earth's first weapon of mass destruction. Around 2.4 billion years ago, during the early Proterozoic Eon, tiny blue-green bacteria called Cyanobacteria started doing something that would make them the most successful environmental terrorists in planetary history. They began photosynthesis, which sounds innocent enough until you realize they were pumping a highly toxic gas called oxygen into an atmosphere where it had never existed in significant amounts before. These cyanobacteria were the first organisms that figured out how to use sunlight to make energy, but their waste product was pure poison to almost everything else alive at the time. The early Earth had been a comfortable place for anaerobic life forms, organisms that not only didn't need oxygen but were actively harmed by it. For billions of years, life had evolved in an oxygen-free world where methane, ammonia, and hydrogen dominated the atmosphere. Suddenly, these microscopic troublemakers started flooding the environment with a gas that was chemically reactive enough to destroy the cellular machinery that most life forms depended on. The scale of this disaster becomes clear when you look at 2025 isotope studies of ancient rock formations. These studies analyze different forms of carbon that get preserved in rocks, and they reveal the proportions of living things that existed during different time periods. The data shows that oxygenation drove mass turnovers among anaerobic life during what scientists call the Great Oxidation Event. Many early anaerobes vanished as oxygen-tolerant lineages emerged to dominate the new atmospheric conditions. This wasn't a gradual decline over millions of years. This was biological warfare on a planetary scale. To understand how catastrophic this was, imagine if aliens showed up tomorrow and started replacing all the air in your house with chlorine gas. That's essentially what happened to the anaerobic organisms that had been running Earth's ecosystems for billions of years. Oxygen is incredibly reactive, which means it bonds aggressively with other molecules and breaks them apart. For organisms that had never encountered this gas before, exposure to oxygen was like being chemically burned from the inside out. Their proteins got oxidized, their cell membranes fell apart, and their DNA got shredded by oxygen-free radicals. The Great Oxidation Event nearly ended life before it really began. The planet had spent billions of years developing complex ecosystems based on anaerobic metabolism, and suddenly the fundamental chemistry of the atmosphere changed completely. Most of the bacterial communities that had colonized the early oceans simply couldn't adapt fast enough. They had no evolutionary experience with oxygen, no protective mechanisms, and no way to repair the damage that this new gas was causing to their cellular structures. The few survivors had to literally hide in oxygen-free zones to avoid being chemically burned alive. These organisms retreated to the deepest parts of the ocean, buried themselves in sediments, or found other places where oxygen concentrations remained low enough for them to survive. They became refugees in their own world, pushed into marginal environments by the toxic waste products of photosynthetic bacteria. Recent discoveries have revealed ancient rock formations that scientists call oxygen refuges, geological structures that preserved anaerobic life during this period of atmospheric transformation. These refuges were like underground bunkers where oxygen-sensitive organisms could wait out the chemical apocalypse happening on the surface. The refuges were found in deep ocean environments and within specific rock formations that acted as barriers against the oxygen-rich atmosphere. Some of these refuges preserved communities of anaerobic bacteria that survived for millions of years, while the rest of the planet's atmosphere became increasingly toxic to their way of life. New research from 2025 shows that some organisms managed to develop what were essentially the first gas masks in Earth's history. These were protective cell walls and chemical defense systems that could neutralize oxygen before it damaged vital cellular components. Some bacteria evolved thick protective layers that prevented oxygen from reaching their sensitive internal machinery. Others developed chemical compounds that could soak up oxygen molecules and render them harmless. These early protective mechanisms were crude, but effective enough to keep some lineages alive during the worst of the oxygen crisis. The organisms that survived this period were either the ones that could hide from oxygen completely or the ones that managed to develop chemical defenses against it. This was evolution under extreme pressure, with natural selection favoring any mutation that provided even slight protection against oxygen toxicity. But the most remarkable survivors were the organisms that learned not just to tolerate oxygen but to use it. Some bacteria developed the ability to harness oxygen for cellular respiration, turning the toxic waste product of photosynthesis into a powerful energy source. This was like learning to breathe fire instead of being burned by it. These aerobic organisms discovered that oxygen could be used to extract much more energy from organic molecules than any previous metabolic process. The chemical reactions that use oxygen to break down organic compounds release about 20 times more energy than anaerobic processes. This meant that organisms that could handle oxygen suddenly had access to energy sources that made them incredibly competitive. They could grow faster, reproduce more quickly, and dominate environments where oxygen levels were rising. The gas that had been a planetary poison became the fuel for a new kind of life that was more energetic and complex than anything that had existed before. The Great Oxidation Event also transformed Earth's geology in dramatic ways. Oxygen reacted with iron that had been dissolved in the ancient oceans, creating massive deposits of iron ore that we can still see in rock formations today. The planet basically rusted on a global scale as oxygen bonded with metals and other compounds that had been stable in the previous atmosphere. These banded iron formations are some of the most visible evidence of how completely the Great Oxidation Event changed Earth's chemistry. The cyanobacteria that started this whole disaster also pulled carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere as part of their photosynthetic process. This removed greenhouse gases and caused global temperatures to plummet. The early Proterozoic period became much colder, and there's evidence that the planet may have experienced conditions where ice covered most of the surface. This mass poisoning event that killed most anaerobic life accidentally created the energy-rich atmosphere that would eventually power complex life. But the climate consequences were about to create an even more extreme challenge for the survivors. The same process that had filled the atmosphere with toxic oxygen was now pulling so much heat out of the system that the entire planet was about to become something unrecognizable. Snowball, Earth's frozen apocalypse. Picture Earth as a giant ice cube floating through space, completely frozen from the North Pole to the South Pole with no liquid water anywhere on the surface. This actually happened to our planet, and climate modeling research from 2025 has shown us exactly how extreme these conditions were. Ice sheets stretched over a mile thick at the equator, which means the tropical regions where we expect palm trees and beaches were buried under more ice than currently covers Antarctica. The entire planet looked like a massive snowball drifting through the solar system. The oceans didn't just freeze over with a thin layer of ice like a pond in winter. They turned into solid ice all the way down to the seafloor. The water that makes up most of our planet's surface became a solid mass of frozen material that extended from the surface down to the ocean bottom. Marine life that had been thriving in liquid water suddenly found themselves trapped in a world where their entire habitat had transformed into solid ice. There was no liquid water anywhere on Earth's surface during these events. This planetary deep freeze happened at least twice during Earth's history, between 600 and 800 million years ago during the Neoproterozoic period. Each time it looked like the final game over for life as we know it. Both times, the planet spent millions of years locked in this frozen state. These weren't brief cold snaps that lasted a few thousand years. These were extended periods where Earth remained frozen for longer than humans have existed as a species. The ice sheets reflected sunlight back into space instead of allowing the planet's surface to absorb heat. This created a feedback loop where the more ice that formed, the more sunlight got reflected away, which made the planet even colder and caused more ice to form. It was like the ultimate freezer burn that lasted for millions of years. The planet got stuck in this frozen condition because once the ice reached a certain coverage, it became almost impossible for the sun's energy to warm the surface enough to start melting the ice sheets. Temperature measurements from ice core samples and geological evidence suggest that global average temperatures dropped to around -40 degrees Fahrenheit. The equatorial regions, which today experience temperatures above 80 degrees Fahrenheit, were probably colder than the current Antarctic winter. There was no seasonal variation because the entire planet was locked under ice. No rain fell anywhere because all the water in the atmosphere was frozen. The only precipitation was snow that added more layers to the already massive ice sheets. Life seemed doomed to extinction under these conditions, but recent evidence from 2025 research has revealed that some organisms managed to survive in hot springs under the ice. Volcanic activity continued even during the frozen periods, and this geothermal energy created pockets of liquid water beneath the ice sheets. These underwater hot springs provided refuge for extremophile organisms that could tolerate high temperatures and unusual chemical conditions. The volcanic vents released heat and dissolved minerals that kept small areas of water liquid, even when the rest of the planet was frozen solid. These volcanic oases were scattered across the ocean floor like tiny islands of liquid water in a world of ice. The organisms that survived in these locations had to be incredibly hardy and adaptable. They lived in water that was often close to boiling, with high concentrations of sulfur and other chemicals that would be toxic to most life forms. These creatures developed specialized enzymes and cellular mechanisms that allowed them to thrive in conditions that would kill ordinary organisms. The volcanic activity that created these refuges also played a crucial role in eventually ending the Snowball Earth periods. Volcanoes continued to release carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere even when the planet was frozen. Over millions of years, these greenhouse gases accumulated in the atmosphere because there were no liquid oceans or active weathering processes to remove them. Eventually, the concentration of greenhouse gases became high enough to trap sufficient heat to begin melting the ice sheets. The melting process created some of the most dramatic climate changes in Earth's history. As the ice began to melt, dark ocean water and land surfaces became exposed, which absorbed more sunlight than the reflective ice had. This triggered rapid warming that caused more ice to melt, which exposed more dark surfaces, which caused even more warming. The planet went from completely frozen to extremely hot in a relatively short geological time period, with global average temperatures potentially reaching higher than 90 degrees Fahrenheit. The organisms that made it through the snowball periods had to restart ecosystems from scratch when the ice finally melted. They became the founding populations for the next phase of Earth's biological development. The genetic bottlenecks created by these extreme survival scenarios meant that the organisms that repopulated the planet after the ice melted had been selected for extreme adaptability and resilience. These freeze-thaw cycles actually accelerated evolution by forcing rapid adaptation to extreme environmental changes. The organisms that survived had to develop new strategies for dealing with temperature extremes, chemical changes, and resource scarcity. The evolutionary innovations that emerged during and after the snowball periods provided the biological toolkit that would be essential for later development. The harsh selective pressure of the frozen world eliminated organisms that couldn't adapt quickly, leaving behind lineages that were exceptionally good at surviving dramatic environmental changes. The survivors of this frozen apocalypse had been through the ultimate stress test, and they emerged with genetic flexibility that would prove essential when the next major challenge arrived. After billions of years of gradual change and catastrophic setbacks, life was about to do something completely unexpected. The Cambrian explosion's biological arms race. Evolution had been taking its time for billions of years, producing mostly single-celled organisms that lived quiet lives in the ocean. Then suddenly, about 538 million years ago, life decided to get creative and went from 0 to 60 in just 25 million years. This period became known as the Cambrian explosion, and it was basically nature's version of a nuclear arms race, except instead of building bombs, organisms were building claws, teeth, armor, and weapons that would make modern military engineers jealous. The Cambrian explosion marked the first time in Earth's history that animals started trying to eat each other on a regular basis. For billions of years, most life forms had been content to filter nutrients out of the water or absorb chemicals from their environment. They were essentially the ocean's equivalent of peaceful hippies, just floating around and minding their own business. But then some organisms developed the ability to hunt and kill other organisms for food. And suddenly, the ocean became a war zone where survival meant either being really good at eating things or being really good at not getting eaten. Fossil discoveries from 2025 research in China have revealed creatures so bizarre they look like alien designs that got rejected from a science fiction movie for being too weird. These Cambrian organisms combine body parts in ways that seem almost random, as if evolution was experimenting with every possible combination of biological features to see what would work. Scientists have found creatures with multiple sets of eyes arranged in patterns that make no sense by modern standards, along with tentacle arms that could bend in directions that would break the bones of any current animal. The peaceful filter feeders that had dominated the oceans for millions of years suddenly found themselves dealing with things that wanted to eat them. It was like going from living in a quiet neighborhood to suddenly having your house surrounded by armed predators. These organisms had to rapidly develop defense mechanisms or risk becoming extinct. Some grew hard shells that could protect their soft bodies from attack. Others developed the ability to burrow into sediment where predators couldn't reach them. A few species learned to move faster so they could escape when danger approached. The first eyes that evolved during this period created what scientists describe as an evolutionary surveillance state. Vision gave predators a massive advantage because they could spot prey from a distance and plan their attacks, but it also gave prey animals the ability to see predators coming and take evasive action. This led to an escalating arms race between better vision and better ways to avoid being seen. Some animals developed compound eyes that could detect movement from multiple directions simultaneously. Others evolved the ability to change color to blend in with their surroundings. Recent discoveries have revealed Cambrian creatures that push the boundaries of what we think of as possible animal designs. Scientists have found fossils of organisms with 5 eyes arranged in a pentagonal pattern around their heads, giving them nearly 360-degree vision. Other creatures had tentacle arms that could extend and retract like telescopes, allowing them to grab prey from surprising distances. Some had sideways mouths that opened perpendicular to their body axis, which seems like a design flaw until you realize it allowed them to process food while continuing to move forward. The diversity of body plans that emerged during the Cambrian period included designs that were so unusual they don't fit into any modern animal categories. There were creatures that looked like walking pineapples with legs, others that resembled mechanical robots with jointed appendages, and some that appeared to be biological experiments in combining features from multiple different animal types. Many of these experimental designs went extinct fairly quickly, but they show how rapidly evolution was testing new approaches to survival and reproduction. Research from 2025 has shown that this period essentially invented almost every major body plan that still exists in the modern world. The basic blueprints for arthropods, mollusks, chordates, and other major animal groups all appeared during this relatively brief window of time. Animals developed segmented bodies that could be specialized for different functions. They evolved jointed limbs that provided mobility and manipulation capabilities. They created internal cavity systems that allowed for more efficient organ organization. The development of hard shells and external skeletons during this period was revolutionary for both offense and defense. Shells provided protection from predators, but also created new opportunities for predators that could figure out how to break through them. This led to the evolution of crushing claws, drilling appendages, and other specialized tools for shell breaking. The arms race between shell makers and shell breakers drove rapid innovation in both protective and offensive capabilities. The question of why this explosion happened so suddenly after billions of years of relatively boring single-celled life has puzzled scientists for decades. The most likely explanation involves a combination of environmental changes and reaching critical thresholds in biological complexity. Oxygen levels in the atmosphere and oceans had been gradually increasing, and they may have reached a point where large, complex, multicellular organisms could finally get enough oxygen to support their metabolic needs. Another factor was probably the development of genetic control systems that could coordinate the activities of multiple cells. Single-celled organisms had been successful for billions of years, but they were limited in size and complexity. Once organisms figured out how to make different cells specialize for different functions and coordinate their activities, it opened up entirely new possibilities for size, shape, and capability. The Cambrian explosion also coincided with changes in ocean chemistry that made it easier for organisms to build shells and hard parts. The availability of calcium carbonate and other shell-building materials increased, which made protective armor more feasible for a wider range of organisms. This created new ecological niches for both shell builders and shell breakers, driving diversification in multiple directions simultaneously. The biological arms race that began during the Cambrian explosion established the template for every animal alive today, including humans. The competition between predators and prey drove the evolution of intelligence, complex sensory systems, and sophisticated behaviors that eventually led to the development of nervous systems capable of learning and adaptation. But all these evolutionary innovations and complex ecosystems that had taken millions of years to develop were about to face something that would make the previous mass extinctions look trivial by comparison. The Great Dying's near-total reset. The Permian-Triassic extinction event represents the closest call in Earth's biological history. About 252 million years ago, 96% of all species got completely deleted from existence in less than 100,000 years. To put that in perspective, if you lined up every animal and plant species that existed before this event, only 4 out of every 100 would still be around afterward. This was the closest life on Earth has ever come to hitting the reset button and starting over from scratch. The Great Dying makes the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs look like a gentle tap on the shoulder. When that space rock hit Earth 66 million years ago, it wiped out about 75% of species, which seemed pretty devastating until scientists started studying what happened at the end of the Permian period. The Great Dying was so thorough that it eliminated entire groups of organisms that had dominated the planet for hundreds of millions of years. Marine ecosystems that had been stable for geological ages simply ceased to exist. New evidence from 2025 points to massive volcanic eruptions in Siberia as the primary culprit behind this planetary catastrophe. These weren't ordinary volcanic eruptions that lasted for a few months or even a few years. The Siberian Trap's volcanism continued for millions of years, releasing enough lava to cover an area equivalent to 2/3 of the entire United States. The scale of this volcanic activity is almost impossible to comprehend. Modern volcanic eruptions that make international headlines release tiny amounts of material compared to what was happening in Siberia during the late Permian period. The lava flows from these eruptions created rock formations that are still visible today, stacked hundreds of feet thick across vast areas of northern Russia. But the lava itself was only part of the problem. The volcanic activity released enormous quantities of carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and other gases into the atmosphere. These gases changed the chemistry of both the atmosphere and the oceans in ways that made survival nearly impossible for most life forms. Earth basically tried to restart itself from scratch during this period. The volcanic emissions created a greenhouse effect that raised global temperatures by about 10 degrees Celsius, which might not sound like much until you realize that this increase was enough to turn most of the planet into an uninhabitable desert. The polar ice caps melted completely and sea levels rose dramatically. Weather patterns became chaotic and unpredictable. Many areas that had been suitable for life became too hot and dry to support any living organisms. Recent discoveries have shown that ocean acidity levels during this time became comparable to battery acid. The massive amounts of carbon dioxide released by the Siberian volcanoes dissolved into seawater and formed carbonic acid. This ocean acidification made it impossible for marine organisms to build shells and skeletons because the acid literally dissolved the calcium carbonate they needed for these structures. Creatures that had been protected by hard shells for millions of years suddenly found their armor being eaten away by the acidic water they lived in. The acidification process happened faster than marine ecosystems could adapt. Coral reefs, which had been major centers of marine biodiversity, simply dissolved in the acidic water. Shellfish populations crashed as their shells became too thin and weak to provide protection. Even organisms that didn't depend directly on calcium carbonate structures were affected because their food sources disappeared when the base of the marine food web collapsed. Research from 2025 has revealed that multiple kill mechanisms were working simultaneously during the Great Dying. Heat from the global warming killed organisms that couldn't tolerate higher temperatures. Acid in the oceans dissolved the shells and skeletons of marine life. Poison gases from volcanic eruptions made the atmosphere toxic to breathe. Starvation followed as food webs collapsed and primary productivity plummeted. This wasn't just one environmental disaster, it was several catastrophes happening at the same time, each one amplifying the effects of the others. The volcanic eruptions released hydrogen sulfide gas, which is toxic to most life forms and smells like rotten eggs. This gas accumulated in the atmosphere and made breathing dangerous for land animals. The combination of high temperatures, toxic gases, and disrupted food webs created conditions where survival required incredible adaptability and a lot of luck. Most organisms couldn't handle even one of these stresses, let alone all of them at once. The few organisms that managed to survive this planetary apocalypse had to possess extraordinary survival capabilities. Scientists call these survivors disaster taxa, and they shared certain characteristics that allowed them to endure conditions that killed everything else around them. Most of the survivors were small organisms with simple body plans and flexible diets. They could tolerate extreme environmental conditions, reproduce quickly when conditions improved, and survive on limited food resources. Some of the disaster taxa were organisms that could enter dormant states when conditions became too harsh. Others were scavengers that could feed on the abundant dead organic matter that accumulated during the extinction event. A few species survived because they lived in protected environments like deep ocean areas that were less affected by the surface changes. These survivors became the founding populations for the recovery of life after the extinction ended. The recovery process took millions of years because the surviving organisms had to rebuild entire ecosystems from scratch. The few species that made it through the Great Dying found themselves in a world with empty ecological niches and reduced competition. They underwent rapid evolutionary diversification as they adapted to fill the roles that had been left vacant by the extinct species. On land, the survivors included some early archosaurs, the group that would eventually give rise to dinosaurs, crocodiles, and birds. These reptiles had certain physiological advantages that helped them survive the extreme conditions. They could regulate their body temperature better than many other animals, they required less food than warm-blooded creatures, and they could survive in the harsh, desert-like conditions that prevailed after the extinction. The near-total extinction that wiped out 96% of all species cleared the ecological stage for entirely new forms of life to take over the world. The dominant groups that had ruled Permian ecosystems were gone, leaving open niches that the surviving archosaurs could expand into. Without competition from established fauna, these early relatives of what would become the most successful group of land animals in Earth's history were free to diversify and evolve into forms that would revolutionize what it meant to be a living creature on this planet. Dinosaur domination and their secret superpowers. These archosaurs evolved into creatures that would redefine what biological sophistication could achieve. Forget everything you think you know about dinosaurs being big, dumb lizards that lumbered around eating plants and occasionally each other. These creatures were basically biological supercomputers wrapped in scales, with internal systems so advanced that modern engineers are still trying to figure out how they worked. Discoveries from 2025 have completely rewritten what we understand about dinosaur biology, and it turns out they had capabilities that would make a modern smartphone look primitive by comparison. Many dinosaur species had built-in air conditioning systems engineered directly into their bone structure. These weren't simple adaptations like panting or seeking shade. Dinosaurs evolved complex networks of air sacs and hollow bones that created sophisticated temperature regulation systems throughout their entire bodies. The air sacs connected to their respiratory systems and extended into their bones, creating a continuous flow of cool air that could regulate body temperature with precision that rivals modern HVAC systems. This internal cooling allowed large dinosaurs to remain active during hot weather when other animals would have been forced to rest. The bone structure analysis from 2025 research shows that these air conditioning systems were tailored to different environmental needs. Desert-dwelling dinosaurs had more extensive air sac networks than forest species. Large predatory dinosaurs had cooling systems focused around their most active muscle groups. Some species could even redirect airflow to different parts of their bodies, depending on activity level and environmental conditions. This wasn't just basic temperature control, this was adaptive climate management built into their anatomy. Recent findings have revealed that some dinosaurs could see colors that exist completely outside human visual perception. While humans can see combinations of red, green, and blue light, many dinosaur species had visual systems that included ultraviolet and infrared detection capabilities. They could perceive color patterns and environmental details that would be completely invisible to us. This expanded color vision gave them advantages in finding food, identifying predators, and communicating with each other that we can barely imagine. The visual capabilities extended beyond just seeing more colors. Some dinosaurs had compound eye structures similar to modern birds but with even greater complexity. They could detect polarized light patterns that helped with navigation, spot tiny movements at great distances, and process visual information faster than most modern animals. Their brains devoted significant processing power to analyzing visual data, which suggests that sight was their primary sense for interacting with the world around them. Evidence shows that dinosaurs developed complex social behaviors that included babysitting cooperatives, where multiple adults would care for young from different families. Fossil sites have revealed nursery areas where juvenile dinosaurs from various parents were grouped together under the protection of several adults. This cooperative child care allowed parent dinosaurs to hunt, forage, and defend territory, while ensuring that their offspring received constant supervision and protection from predators. The parenting skills of some dinosaur species would put modern helicopter parents to shame. Take Tyrannosaurus rex, for example. These massive predators brought food directly to their young for years after hatching, teaching them hunting techniques through demonstration and practice sessions. Adult T-Rex would capture prey but not kill it immediately, instead bringing wounded animals back to their nests so young dinosaurs could practice their killing techniques on live targets. They provided graduated hunting lessons that progressed from small, helpless prey to larger, more dangerous animals as their offspring developed strength and skill. Research from 2025 has revealed that some dinosaur species could change color like chameleons, using specialized skin cells called chromatophores to alter their appearance for camouflage and communication. These color-changing abilities weren't limited to simple light-to-dark transitions. Some dinosaurs could produce complex patterns, shifting color combinations that matched their surroundings or conveyed specific messages to other dinosaurs. The color changes happened rapidly enough to be used during active hunting or social interactions. Recent discoveries have uncovered dinosaur communities that can only be described as organized cities with structured nesting colonies. These weren't random gatherings of animals, but carefully planned settlements with designated areas for different activities. Nesting zones were separated from feeding areas and waste disposal sites. Some colonies had defensive perimeters where large adults patrolled to protect the community from predators. The organization required coordination and communication between multiple family groups. These dinosaur cities showed evidence of resource sharing and collaborative construction projects. Multiple families would work together to build communal nesting mounds, sharing materials and labor to create structures that provided better protection than individual nests. Some colonies diverted water flow to create artificial ponds for drinking and cooling. Others modified vegetation patterns to create better feeding grounds or defensive barriers. The success of dinosaurs during their 165 million-year reign came from intelligence levels that rivaled modern birds and mammals. Brain cavity analysis from fossilized skulls shows that many dinosaur species had brain-to-body ratios comparable to contemporary intelligent animals. They could solve complex problems, remember detailed geographic information, and adapt their behavior based on changing circumstances. Some species showed evidence of using tools and modifying their environment to suit their needs. Dinosaur intelligence manifested in sophisticated hunting strategies that involved coordinated group tactics, ambush techniques, and the ability to learn from failed attempts. They could recognize individual members of their own species and maintain complex social hierarchies. Some dinosaurs demonstrated planning abilities, storing food for future use and preparing nesting sites well in advance of breeding seasons. Their problem-solving capabilities allowed them to thrive in diverse environments and adapt to changing ecological conditions. The neurological complexity extended to emotional and social intelligence. Dinosaurs showed evidence of grief behaviors when family members died, playful interactions between individuals, and long-term pair bonding in some species. They could communicate through vocalizations, body language, and color displays with a sophistication that allowed for detailed information exchange about food sources, territorial boundaries, and potential threats. The most remarkable aspect of dinosaur success is that they never actually went extinct. They evolved into birds, which means dinosaurs are still the most successful group of land vertebrates on the planet today. Modern birds retain many of the advanced capabilities that made their dinosaur ancestors so successful, including complex intelligence, sophisticated sensory systems, and remarkable adaptability. But for 165 million years, these biological marvels ruled the planet with their advanced capabilities and complex societies, completely unaware that their dominance was about to be challenged by something they had no way to prepare for. The asteroid that changed everything. 66 million years ago, a 6-mile-wide chunk of space rock was hurtling toward Earth at 45,000 miles per hour, and nobody saw it coming. This asteroid was roughly the size of Mount Everest, moving faster than anything humans have ever built, carrying enough kinetic energy to change the course of planetary history. It had been traveling through space for millions of years, following an orbit that would intersect with Earth's path around the Sun at exactly the wrong moment for dinosaurs and exactly the right moment for the eventual evolution of mammals. Impact modeling from 2025 shows that when this cosmic bullet hit Earth near what is now the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, it released energy equivalent to 10 billion atomic bombs detonating simultaneously. To put that in perspective, the most powerful nuclear weapon ever tested by humans released about 50 megatons of energy. This asteroid impact released roughly 100 million megatons, or 2 million times more energy than the largest human-made explosion in history. The collision happened so fast that the asteroid vaporized completely before it could penetrate more than a few miles into Earth's crust. What makes this event even more remarkable is that it happened on what seemed like just another Tuesday 66 million years ago. Dinosaurs were going about their normal daily routines, hunting prey, caring for their young, and maintaining their complex social structures. The planet was warm and lush, with no ice caps at the poles and tropical vegetation growing much closer to the Arctic than it does today. There was no warning, no gradual buildup of atmospheric changes, no advance notice that the entire world was about to be transformed in a matter of hours. Recent discoveries have revealed the exact sequence of events in the first 24 hours after impact, and the timeline reads like a script for the end of the world. Within seconds of impact, the collision created a crater 20 miles deep and 120 miles wide. The energy released instantly vaporized the asteroid and millions of tons of rock, creating a fireball that briefly reached temperatures hotter than the surface of the sun. This superheated material shot straight up through the atmosphere and out into space, then rained back down as molten glass spherules that ignited fires across the entire planet. The impact also triggered massive earthquakes that registered magnitude 10 or higher on the Richter scale, far beyond anything in recorded human history. These seismic waves traveled around the globe multiple times, causing landslides, tsunamis, and volcanic eruptions thousands of miles from the impact site. Coastal areas worldwide were hit by tsunamis hundreds of feet high that penetrated hundreds of miles inland. The seismic energy was so intense that it destabilized geological formations on the opposite side of the planet from the impact site. Within hours, global wildfires were burning on every continent. The molten debris that had been blasted into space came raining back down as a continuous shower of superheated glass beads. These tiny projectiles ignited any flammable material they touched, creating fires that spread faster than animals could flee. Forests that had been growing for millions of years were reduced to ash in a matter of days. The smoke and soot from these fires blocked out sunlight across most of the planet, creating an artificial night that lasted for months. The impact winter that followed lasted much longer than scientists previously thought. New research shows that sunlight was blocked for at least 2 years, and global temperatures dropped by more than 25 degrees Celsius in some regions. Photosynthesis essentially stopped working for plants that had survived the initial catastrophe. Without sunlight reaching the surface, food webs collapsed from the bottom up as plants died and herbivorous animals starved. The darkness was so complete that daytime looked like twilight, and nighttime was pitch black. Research from 2025 reveals that size was the most critical factor determining which animals survived this planetary catastrophe. Large animals required more food, produced fewer offspring, and couldn't adapt quickly enough to the rapidly changing conditions. Dinosaurs that weighed more than about 25 pounds had virtually no chance of survival. The few dinosaur lineages that made it through were the smallest species, which eventually evolved into modern birds. Most of the surviving mammals were tiny creatures that weighed less than a modern house cat. These small mammals had several advantages that allowed them to survive when giants couldn't. They needed less food to maintain their body temperature and metabolism. They could reproduce more quickly, allowing their populations to recover faster when conditions improved. Many were already adapted to living in burrows or other protected environments that provided shelter from the toxic atmosphere and temperature extremes. Some could enter temporary hibernation states that reduced their energy requirements during the worst periods. The mammals that survived were mostly rat-like creatures that had been living in the shadows of dinosaur-dominated ecosystems for over 100 million years. Before the asteroid impact, mammals had remained small and relatively simple because dinosaurs occupied most of the ecological niches for larger animals. The extinction of dinosaurs suddenly opened up thousands of vacant ecological roles that mammals could evolve to fill. Without large predatory dinosaurs controlling terrestrial ecosystems, mammals were free to experiment with new body sizes, diets, and survival strategies. The recovery process happened faster than anyone expected based on the severity of the initial destruction. Within a few million years, which is rapid by geological standards, mammal diversity exploded as different lineages adapted to fill the empty niches left by extinct dinosaurs. Some mammals evolved to become large herbivores like the dinosaurs that had dominated plant-eating roles. Others became predators that hunted the new herbivorous mammals. A few developed the ability to fly, swim, or climb trees, as they explored survival strategies that had been unavailable when dinosaurs controlled most terrestrial environments. Without this cosmic accident that eliminated dinosaur dominance, humans would never have evolved and dinosaurs would still rule Earth today. The mammal lineage that eventually led to primates and humans only had the opportunity to develop because the asteroid cleared away the established dinosaur ecosystems that had prevented mammal diversification for over 100 million years. But the story of mammal evolution was just getting started, and the world they inherited would soon become home to creatures that would make even the largest dinosaurs look small by comparison. Ice ages and the rise of megafauna. The mammals that inherited this transformed world faced environmental conditions that would soon favor creatures of extraordinary size. Giant ground sloths the size of small cars once wandered across North America, using claws longer than baseball bats to strip leaves from trees that stood 40 feet tall. These weren't the slow-moving sloths we know today that hang upside down in tropical trees. Megatherium was a massive creature that weighed as much as an elephant and could rear up on its hind legs to reach vegetation that other herbivores couldn't access. They had thick, powerful limbs and enormous claws that could tear through wood like it was cardboard. These ground sloths were just one example of the biological giants that dominated the planet during the ice ages. The Pleistocene epoch created a world where being big was a major advantage for survival. Cold climates favored large animals because bigger bodies retained heat more efficiently than smaller ones. This principle, known as Bergmann's rule, explains why polar bears are larger than their tropical relatives and why woolly mammoths grew to massive sizes while their modern elephant cousins are smaller. Large animals have a lower surface area to volume ratio, which means they lose less body heat relative to their mass. During ice ages, when temperatures dropped significantly across most of the planet, animals that could maintain their body temperature had better survival rates. Woolly mammoths were perhaps the most famous of these ice age giants, but they were far from the only ones. Saber-toothed cats like Smilodon had canine teeth that extended 7 inches beyond their gums, perfect for piercing the thick hides of large prey animals. Cave bears grew to sizes that dwarfed modern grizzlies. Giant beavers called Asteroids were as large as black bears and built dams that could alter entire river systems. Short-faced bears stood over 6 feet tall at the shoulder and could run faster than modern horses despite their enormous size. The cold climate advantages of large body size created an evolutionary pressure toward gigantism that affected almost every major animal group. Even normally small animals like rodents produced giant versions during ice age periods. Capybaras the size of hippopotamuses roamed South America. Armadillos grew to the size of small cars and developed thick, bony shells that could protect them from the largest predators. These giant armadillos, called glyptodonts, were basically living tanks that weighed several tons and had spiked clubs on their tails for defense. Discoveries from 2025 have revolutionized our understanding of these ice age giants through perfectly preserved specimens with intact DNA. Frozen mammoth carcasses found in Siberian permafrost contain genetic material so well preserved that scientists can analyze individual genes and understand how these animals adapted to cold environments. The DNA reveals that woolly mammoths had multiple genetic adaptations for cold weather, including genes that produce special blood proteins to prevent freezing and others that controlled the growth of their thick, insulating fur coats. The genetic analysis has also revealed surprising details about mammoth behavior and social structure. DNA from different individuals found at the same sites shows family relationships that indicate mammoths lived in complex social groups similar to modern elephants. Some frozen specimens contain stomach contents that reveal exactly what these giants were eating during their final meals. Seeds, grasses, and other plant material found in mammoth stomachs have provided detailed information about ice age ecosystems and plant communities. Giant beavers from the Pleistocene make modern construction equipment look modest by comparison. Asteroid's Ohioensis was 8 feet long and weighed as much as a small car. Their front teeth were 6 inches long and kept growing throughout their lives, requiring constant gnawing to keep them sharp and properly sized. These massive beavers built dams and lodges on a scale that could significantly alter local hydrology. Their engineering projects created wetland habitats that supported diverse communities of other ice age animals. The relationship between ice age humans and these megafauna was complex and varied depending on the species and geographic location. Archaeological evidence shows that early humans hunted mammoths, mastodons, and other large animals, but they also developed sophisticated strategies for living alongside dangerous predators like cave bears and saber-toothed cats. Some human settlements were positioned to take advantage of natural migration routes used by herds of large herbivores. Others were located near kill sites, where multiple human groups would cooperate to hunt and process enormous animals. Research from 2025 shows that humans and climate change worked together as a devastating combination that drove most megafauna to extinction. The end of the last ice age brought rapid warming that altered plant communities and reduced the cold-adapted habitats that many giant animals needed to survive. At the same time, human populations were expanding and developing more effective hunting technologies. The timing of megafauna extinctions closely matches the arrival of humans in different parts of the world, suggesting that hunting pressure was often the final factor that pushed already stressed populations over the edge. The speed at which these giants disappeared once humans arrived in new areas was remarkable and tragic. In North America, most megafauna species went extinct within a few thousand years after humans crossed the land bridge from Asia. Similar patterns occurred in Australia, where giant marsupials disappeared shortly after human arrival, and on islands around the world where large animals vanished soon after humans reached them by boat. The extinctions happened so quickly that many species left no descendants and minimal genetic legacy in the fossil record. We're living in an unusually small animal world because we accidentally eliminated most of the giants that dominated ecosystems for millions of years. The largest land animals today are a fraction of the size of their ice age predecessors. African elephants are smaller than woolly mammoths. Modern bears are dwarfed by their short-faced relatives. Even our largest predators would have been considered medium-sized during the Pleistocene. The biological communities we see today are missing the top tier of large animals that shaped ecosystems and influenced the evolution of other species for millions of years. But the most remarkable extinction story isn't about the giants we lost. It's about the species that almost disappeared completely and somehow managed to survive against impossible odds. Human evolution's unlikely success story. Our own species represents perhaps the most improbable survival story in this entire planetary history. 70,000 years ago, the entire human species consisted of roughly 2,000 individuals scattered across Africa. To put that in perspective, there are more people in a typical suburban shopping mall on a Saturday afternoon than there were humans on the entire planet during this genetic bottleneck. Our species was so close to extinction that every person alive today descends from this tiny population that somehow managed to survive when everything seemed stacked against them. The genetic diversity of our entire species got squeezed down to levels that would make conservation biologists panic if they saw similar numbers in endangered wildlife populations today. This near-extinction event created a genetic legacy that still affects humans today. The limited number of breeding individuals meant that certain genetic variations became fixed in our species while others disappeared forever. Modern genetic analysis shows that humans have significantly less genetic diversity than most other mammal species, even those we consider endangered. Chimpanzees, our closest living relatives, have about 4 times more genetic variation than humans despite having much smaller current population sizes. This genetic uniformity among humans is direct evidence of how close we came to joining the list of evolutionary failures. From this desperately small population, humans somehow managed to achieve planetary dominance in what amounts to an evolutionary instant. Within 70,000 years, which is barely a tick on the geological clock, humans spread to every continent except Antarctica and became the most influential species in Earth's history. This expansion happened faster than almost any other large mammal has ever achieved global distribution. Most species take millions of years to spread across continents and adapt to different environments, but humans accomplished this feat while developing complex cultures, sophisticated technologies, and social systems that rival anything seen in the natural world. The speed of human expansion becomes even more remarkable when you consider that multiple human species existed simultaneously during much of our evolutionary history. Neanderthals lived in Europe and parts of Asia, Denisovans occupied other regions of Asia, Homo floresiensis survived on islands in Indonesia, and several other human species were scattered across different parts of the world. These weren't distant relatives from millions of years ago. They were contemporary human species that coexisted with our ancestors for thousands of years. Neanderthals were basically the jocks to our nerds in prehistoric high school. They were physically stronger, had larger brains, and were perfectly adapted to the cold European environment where they had lived for hundreds of thousands of years. Neanderthals were skilled hunters who made sophisticated tools and even created art and jewelry. They had every advantage that should have made them the successful human species, yet they disappeared around 40,000 years ago while our apparently less impressive ancestors survived and thrived. Genetic studies from 2025 have revealed extensive interbreeding between Homo sapiens and other human species, particularly Neanderthals and Denisovans. Modern humans outside Africa carry between 1 and 4% Neanderthal DNA, and some populations in Asia and Oceania have significant amounts of Denisovan genetic material. This interbreeding wasn't just occasional contact between different groups, it was substantial enough to transfer adaptive genetic variants that helped humans survive in new environments. Some of the Neanderthal genes that persist in modern humans are involved in immune system function, skin pigmentation, and cold adaptation. Recent discoveries about human migration patterns reveal sophisticated survival strategies that allowed small groups to colonize new territories successfully. Archaeological evidence shows that early humans developed specialized toolkits for different environments, created complex trade networks that spanned hundreds of miles, and maintained cultural connections across vast distances. They learned to exploit marine resources along coastlines, adapt to desert environments, and survive in Arctic conditions that would challenge modern humans equipped with advanced technology. Research from 2025 shows that human success came primarily from cooperation and information sharing rather than individual superiority. While other human species may have been stronger or better adapted to specific environments, Homo sapiens developed unmatched abilities to work together, share knowledge, and transmit cultural information across generations. This cooperative advantage allowed human groups to accumulate knowledge and skills much faster than individual learning could achieve. The development of language was crucial to this cooperative advantage. Complex communication allowed humans to coordinate group activities, share detailed information about resources and dangers, and transmit accumulated knowledge to offspring and other group members. Language made it possible for humans to learn from the experiences of others without having to personally encounter every survival challenge. This cultural learning accelerated human adaptation to new environments and situations. Archaeological evidence reveals that the development of art and culture accompanied human expansion around the world. Cave paintings, carved figurines, musical instruments, and decorative objects appear in human settlements across different continents and time periods. These cultural expressions weren't just recreational activities. They served important functions in maintaining group identity, transmitting information, and strengthening social bonds that held communities together during difficult periods. The creation of symbolic culture allowed humans to develop shared belief systems and social norms that could coordinate the behavior of large groups. Religious practices, storytelling traditions, and ceremonial activities created common identities that extended beyond immediate family relationships. These cultural systems made it possible for human societies to grow larger and more complex than the small kinship groups that characterized most other mammal species. The survival of Homo sapiens was so unlikely that we're basically the universe's lottery winners. Every other human species that existed during our evolutionary history went extinct, often despite having apparent advantages over our ancestors. The combination of environmental challenges, competition from other species, and the simple randomness of evolutionary processes should have eliminated our lineage along with all the others. Instead, through a combination of lucky timing, beneficial mutations, cultural innovations, and cooperative behaviors, our species not only survived but became the dominant force shaping life on Earth. But that dominance has come with consequences that are now reshaping the planet in ways that rival the most catastrophic events in geological history. Welcome to the Anthropocene. Scientists now recognize humans as a geological force, equivalent to volcanoes and asteroids in our ability to reshape the entire planet. Welcome to the Anthropocene, a new geological epoch created specifically to describe our unprecedented impact on Earth's systems. This represents the first time in our planet's 4.6 billion year history that a single species has gained the ability to alter global systems faster than natural processes can respond. Our influence now shows up in rock layers, atmospheric chemistry, and ocean composition in ways that will be visible to geologists millions of years from now. Data from 2025 research shows we're currently driving the sixth mass extinction event in Earth's history, but this one is different from all the others. Previous mass extinctions were caused by asteroid impacts, volcanic eruptions, or gradual climate changes that took thousands or millions of years to unfold. Our extinction event is happening in real time, driven by a single species that appeared just 300,000 years ago and only became a global force in the last few centuries. Current extinction rates are running 1,000 to 10,000 times higher than the natural background rate that existed before humans started reshaping ecosystems. The speed of change we've created is almost incomprehensible when compared to past geological events. Ice ages took millions of years to advance and retreat, gradually altering landscapes and forcing species to adapt or relocate. We've changed the planet more in the last 200 years than those massive ice sheets accomplished over millennia. The atmospheric concentration of carbon dioxide has increased by more than 40% since the Industrial Revolution began, which represents a rate of change that's unprecedented in recent geological history. The current warming trend is clearly the result of human activities since the mid-1800s and is proceeding at a rate not seen over many recent millennia. Human impact has become so pervasive that it's literally embedded in the rock record that future geologists will study. Plastic pollution has spread to every corner of the planet, from the deepest ocean trenches to the highest mountain peaks. Microplastics are now found in sediments that are forming the rock layers of tomorrow. Future scientists will be able to identify the exact moment when humans became a dominant geological force by looking at the sudden appearance of artificial materials, altered isotope ratios, and chemical signatures that don't occur in nature. The human layer in future rock formations will be as obvious to geologists as the iridium layer that marks the asteroid impact that killed the dinosaurs. Our signature includes not just plastic debris, but also concrete, metals, glass, and synthetic chemicals that have never existed before in Earth's history. The isotopic composition of carbon in modern sediments reflects the massive amounts of fossil fuel burning that has characterized the last 2 centuries. Nitrogen levels in soils worldwide show the impact of industrial fertilizer production that has doubled the amount of reactive nitrogen in global ecosystems. Research from 2025 has identified multiple tipping points in Earth's climate and ecosystem stability that we're rapidly approaching or may have already crossed. The Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, the massive ocean current system that helps regulate global climate, shows signs of weakening that could trigger severe droughts across key agricultural regions. Arctic sea ice is disappearing faster than climate models predicted, reducing the planet's ability to reflect sunlight back to space. Permafrost in the Arctic contains enormous amounts of carbon that could be released as greenhouse gases if warming continues, creating a feedback loop that accelerates climate change beyond human control. These tipping points represent thresholds where gradual changes suddenly become rapid and potentially irreversible. The Amazon rainforest may be approaching a point where large areas shift from carbon sink to carbon source, releasing stored carbon instead of absorbing it from the atmosphere. Coral reef systems worldwide are experiencing bleaching events with increasing frequency, and many reefs may not recover if ocean temperatures and acidity continue to increase. The West Antarctic ice sheet shows signs of instability that could lead to dramatic sea level rise, affecting hundreds of millions of people in coastal areas. The question facing our species is whether we can avoid joining the list of organisms that caused their own extinction. Throughout Earth's history, some species have grown so successful that they altered their environment in ways that made their own survival impossible. Ancient cyanobacteria poisoned themselves by producing oxygen that was toxic to anaerobic life forms. Some marine organisms created conditions that led to ocean chemistry changes that eliminated their habitats. We face a similar risk if we continue altering planetary systems faster than we can adapt to the changes we're creating. The difference is that we're the first species that can recognize what we're doing and potentially change course before it's too late. We have the scientific knowledge to understand the consequences of our actions and the technological capability to develop alternatives that could reduce our impact on planetary systems. The challenge is whether we can coordinate global action quickly enough to avoid the worst-case scenarios that our current trajectory suggests. Recent evidence about potential solutions and restoration efforts provides some reasons for cautious optimism. Renewable energy technologies are improving rapidly and becoming cost-competitive with fossil fuels in many markets. Reforestation and ecosystem restoration projects are showing success in rebuilding habitats and sequestering carbon. The America the Beautiful initiative and similar programs worldwide are working to protect and restore natural areas that provide essential ecosystem services. Some damaged ecosystems are showing remarkable resilience when given the chance to recover. Marine protected areas have demonstrated that ocean ecosystems can bounce back quickly when fishing pressure and other human impacts are reduced. Breeding programs for endangered species have successfully brought some animals back from the brink of extinction. Technological advances in clean energy, sustainable agriculture, and waste reduction are providing tools that could allow human civilization to reduce its environmental footprint while maintaining quality of life. The most important realization emerging from our study of Earth's history is that we're the first species capable of consciously directing our own evolutionary path and planetary future. Every previous mass extinction was caused by external forces or by species that couldn't control their impact on the environment. We have the unique ability to understand the consequences of our actions, predict future outcomes, and deliberately choose different strategies based on scientific evidence. This unprecedented capability comes with unprecedented responsibility, and the choices we make in the coming decades may determine not just our own survival, but the fate of countless other species that share this planet with us. Looking at this planetary timeline reveals something remarkable about life itself. Earth's 4.6 billion year story shows that life as a whole is incredibly resilient, surviving asteroid impacts, global poisoning events, and planetary freeze cycles that would make our current climate challenges look manageable. But individual species are surprisingly fragile. 99% of all species that ever existed are now extinct, including successful groups like dinosaurs that dominated for 165 million years. We're facing environmental changes that mirror past extinction events, but we're also the first species that can choose our response. We can consciously direct evolution and planetary stewardship instead of just reacting to changes around us.